In the past, I showed you how I made a router table. Then I showed you how I upgraded that router table. Well, today, I'm going to show you how I use that router table to make a picture frame. Since I've never made a picture frame before, I'm going to start small. I have this nice 5x7 print of a picture I took of Chicago back when I lived downtown, so I'm going to build a frame for that. The frame itself is made from 1x2 pine board. I found 6-foot boards of these at Home Depot for only a few bucks each. They're called Select Pine, which I think just means they're higher quality than framing lumber. But they're nice to look at. They're nice and smooth, they're straight, and they have no knots. Before cutting anything, I drew out a quick sketch of the frame to figure out the dimensions I need for each piece. After factoring in the board width, the rabbet that'll hold the picture, and some extra wiggle room inside the frame, I decided the outside edge will measure 9.5 inches by 7.5 inches. I started by cutting out the individual pieces of the frame from the 1x2 pine board. In retrospect, I should have routed the entire board first and then cut out the pieces I needed. It would have made using the router easier, but I still ended up with a picture frame and I learned a lesson in using my router. When cutting the pieces, there are two vitally important things to remember so you end up with a square frame. First, measure very carefully because you want the opposite sides to match each other. Second, you need perfect 45-degree cuts. To get that 45-degree cut with my circular saw, I clamped down a speed square and used the 45-degree edge to guide my cut. The hardest part was keeping the bed of the saw level to the ground because there wasn't much wood to keep the bed steady. After cutting out all 4 pieces, I quickly made sure they fit together well before cleaning up and moving downstairs. I test fit the pieces again and played around until I got an arrangement I liked best. Then I numbered matching corners on the back of the pieces so I can easily reassemble it and tell which sides of the wood are the front or the back. The first router bit I used is a rabbeting bit, which will add a groove to the inside edge of the back. This groove will hold the picture and glass in the frame. I wanted the rabbet to go halfway or even 2/3 of the way into the frame, but I couldn't route that much of the wood at once. Instead, I first made a shallow pass and then adjusted the router depth to make a deeper pass. Once I routed all 4 sides, the back of the frame is looking pretty good. Next, I used a small roundover bit for the inside edge of the front of the frame to add a little contour. This is the same bit I used on the shelves of the router table cabinet to soften their corners. Finally, I used a Roman ogee bit on the outside edge of the front. This was the toughest to use, especially with the short pieces. The bit takes out a fair amount of wood, so you need to have a firm grip on the piece while guiding it through. Plus, I had to be extra careful at the corners to make sure I didn't mess up the edges. This would have been a lot easier to route as one long piece of wood. With the routing done, it's almost time to assemble the frame. But first, I used some 220 grit sandpaper to smooth out any imperfections in the wood and get it ready for painting later on. I figured it would be easier to sand individual pieces rather than the entire frame. To finally assemble the frame, I dry fit the pieces together and made sure the frame was square. Then, I used some painter's tape on 2 of the corners to lock them into position. I added some wood glue to those taped up corners. Then, I added tape and glue to the other 2 corners. Finally, I used 2 clamps to carefully press all the pieces together while they dried. After almost an hour, I removed the clamps and my frame looks really good. Instead of using glass in the frame, I used some thin acrylic. I measured the correct width and then scored the acrylic with a cutting tool until I cut deep enough to cleanly snap the piece apart. Then, I repeated the process to cut the acrylic to the right height. Finally, I checked to make sure the acrylic fit into my frame. I wanted the frame to be black, so I gave it a few coats of some flat black spray paint. I finished the paint job with a matte clear coat spray. I let it dry overnight, and here's the result. To finish the frame, I put in the acrylic, added my picture, some foam core as a backing, and then I used some glazing points to secure everything into the frame. I bought these at Home Depot, but I'm sure you can find them at any craft store or even Amazon. I used a putty knife to get the points part way into the wood and then hammered them in to really secure everything. And that's it. All that's left is to hang it on the wall. This was a fun, easy project, and now I have a little more decoration in my workshop. Plus, I got to learn more about using my router table. I wish I could have used a miter saw or table saw to make the actual cuts though, but for now I don't have enough space in my workshop for those tools, so I guess my circular saw technique is going to have to make do. For future frames, I think it'll be fun to add to my router bit collection so I can try out different contours and looks. But since router bits are kind of expensive, I think that collection will probably grow pretty slowly. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any suggestions or tips for making picture frames, let me know in the comments below. And while you're here, check out my other videos to see other things I've built. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new videos. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.